we're about a week out from the NFL regular season starting, and at that point, it would have been 7 months since we've last seen real football be played. And I've missed it. I know y'all have too. It's been a really long offseason. It's been a really long 7 months, and so much has changed, and so much has happened. And today, we're going to go over everything that's happened outside of the draft and a few injuries here and there. We're going to go over signings, players returning to their old franchises, trades, extensions, all of that. So, let's talk about the 2025 NFL offseason. This is Son of a Sports. Let's get into it. Okay, that entire intro was filmed, and pretty much everything up until player moves was filmed before the Micah trade happened, and it happened while filming and editing this video. So, yeah, we will mention that in a little bit. So, stay along for the ride. So, let's start with coach hirings because that's pretty much the earliest part of the offseason. And when Black Monday came, the Patriots immediately moved off Gerard Mayo and quickly moved on to sign Mike Vrabel, who was out of the job for 2024, was fired by the Titans the previous year, and it was kind of a shocker then. And it wasn't very surprising that the Patriots are going to go in Mike Vrabel's direction. Former Patriot, won Super Bowls with them. They just fired a former player, Gerard Mayo, and it felt like Mike Vrabel, with his experience and his connection to the organization, was a clear-cut guy. There was rumors that he might go to Ohio State when they lost to Michigan in the regular season that year, but Ohio State obviously won the national championship, and Vrabel moved on to the Patriots. Then we move on. About a week and a half later, Ben Johnson was hired by the Bears. Felt like a match made in heaven. Like if the Bears moved on for Matt Eberflus the previous offseason, it felt like Ben was probably going to be interested in that job, and Ben took the job there. It just, for a while, it felt like that was the connection that was going to happen. Then Aaron Glenn, a lot of rumors about where he'd go. Maybe the Saints because of his connections to that organization, or the Jets because of his connections to that organization because he played there when he was a player. And Aaron Glenn became the second Texas A&M player to become a head coach currently in the league. And then we move on again because that Friday, there was 3 more hirings. Liam Cohen agreed to become the Jaguars head coach after telling them no initially, but then they fired their GM, Trent Baalke, and he told Tampa Bay, sorry, I know y'all were going to give me an extension, but I want to become a head coach, and the Jaguars are offering me a lot. Then Pete Carroll was also announced as the head coach for the Raiders, which was a pretty big shocker because no one really saw Pete coming back to be the Raiders head coach. There were rumors he might be interested in the Bears job. Then when that didn't happen, people weren't really talking about Pete as a serious candidate anymore. And then out of nowhere, Pete was hired as the Raiders coach. And then that night, there were a lot of rumors about what the Cowboys were going to do, specifically with one guy, Brian Schottenheimer. They had a pretty lazy coaching search. A lot of us remember that. And they hired him that night, or it was announced. Then we moved forward a few weeks, and that was when the last coach hiring of the cycle happened, Kellen Moore. It was right after the Super Bowl. He told the Saints to just wait because he wants to focus on the Super Bowl. And about a few days later, he agreed to the job with the Saints. Then we can go through the retirements because there was a lot. There were a lot of notable ones. Let's start with the Cowboys ones because those broke my heart. Zach Martin and Tyron Smith both retired as Cowboys. Tyron spent his last year with the Jets. We all know that, but they both retired as Cowboys. They both had their ceremonies. It was emotional. Moving on, the Saints had a lot of retirements. Ryan Ramczyk retired after 7 years in the NFL, one of the best right tackles in the NFL. Derek Carr retired because of the shoulder injury. He opted not to get surgery and just retire, call it a career. A little bit surprising there. Tyrann Mathieu retired right before training camp, or right at the start of training camp. Big surprise there. Teron Armstead, a former Saint and a Dolphin now, still had a really good year last year, ended up retiring. It was sad. It was sad all around for the Saints organization this offseason. And Jimmy Graham retired, which was also sad. And then speaking of Tyrann Mathieu, his former teammate and mentor, Patrick Peterson, retired this offseason, called it quits after 13 years. And, I mean, we all know Patrick Peterson in his prime and how good he was there. And then the Eagles, Brandon Graham retired, and the former Eagle in his last playable year in the NFL, Ndamukong Suh, retired. Both really good defensive linemen that will be remembered forever in the NFL. Lions players, Frank Ragnow retired, which was pretty sad. And kind of a shocker. It was out of nowhere. And he didn't want to keep piling up injuries. He was more injury prone at this stage of his career, and you just kind of call it quits at that point. Former linebackers and CJ Mosley, who was already cut by the Jets, decided to announce on his 33rd birthday he was going to call it quits. And Anthony Barr, a 10-year veteran that was mostly known for his time with the Vikings, retired. It's a really, really, really long retirement list that ends with Julio Jones, who didn't play 2024 and finished in Philly as well, and also a player that will be remembered forever. Okay, talking about player movement and all of that's going to be a little difficult because I keep going back and forth on whether or not to talk about it in order, by team, by position. We're just going to start with the move that kicked everything off, and that was sort of Seattle moving on from Geno Smith and sending him to the Raiders. It was kind of a shock to everybody because there wasn't any pre-tell signs that Seattle was ready to move off of Geno. There were signs that Geno might want an extension, but not anything that indicated Seattle was done with him. But they traded him to the Raiders to pair up him and his former head coach and Pete Carroll, and they made it clear right away. The plan was to go after Sam Darnold once free agency opened, and about a week later, they did just that and got Sam once free agency opened. The Browns needed a new quarterback because Deshaun Watson re-tore his Achilles after tearing it during the 2024 season, then re-tore it again in January. And no matter what, they were going to shake up their quarterback room. Right after the Super Bowl, they traded for Kenny Pickett, and it was clear that he was probably going to be the backup. And before they brought back former starter after Watson got hurt in 2023, Joe Flacco. And then the Colts brought in Daniel Jones to compete for the starting job with Anthony Richardson, and he won it. I think more so Richardson lost it, but Daniel Jones is currently the starter for the Indianapolis Colts. Sorry, Colts fans. The Giants made 2 quick moves, going to get Jameis Winston to be the backup for 2025, and then getting Russell Wilson to be the starter for 2025. And the Jets, actually, it's the same building. The Jets decided to move on from Aaron Rodgers. Their front office and coaching staff decided they need a culture shift. They need to go in a new direction, and holding on to what the old staff wanted is not something that's going to work for them. So they told Rodgers to kick rocks and signed Justin Fields for the short term. And Rodgers was looking for a new team, and the Steelers, without having a quarterback in Russell Wilson anymore, were immediately connected to Rodgers and kind of made him wait before eventually deciding to sign with them. The moves that happened in early March were kind of crazy. Let's just start with Deebo Samuel. Deebo and the 49ers felt like they were heading towards a divorce no matter what, but the Commanders finalized that divorce by trading for Deebo in a trade that sent back, I believe, just like a 5th-round pick, something small. And yeah, it was over. But the Commanders weren't done because they traded for Laramie Tunsil from the Texans. Again, another shocker of a trade because he was like the one, secure guy on the Texans O-line in 2024. Yes, he had penalties, and he was really, really bad at false starting in 2024. But he was still the one guy that was a secure starter for the long term for the Texans because he was still playing at an all-pro level. There were tons of reports on why they were done with him, but I'm not going to get into that. Let's move on because the Texans made other moves. They went and got Christian Kirk after he was almost cut from the Jaguars, and now he's on his last year of his deal. Jaguars are going to move on from him no matter what. Last minute, Texans traded for him. And then at the same time, the Texans traded Kenyon Green to the Eagles for C.J. Gardner-Johnson, a move that the Eagles made, I guess, to free up cap space. I don't know, because Kenyon Green is no longer on their team either. And the Steelers, the team I just mentioned earlier with Aaron Rodgers, their first major move of the offseason was going to get DK Metcalf just a week after Seattle traded Geno Smith to the Raiders. They also moved off of their number one receiver of 6 years. 6 years? 5 years? Who cares? DK needed an extension, and he got one from the Steelers. And the question was, how are him and Pickens going to fit? Because they're the same archetype of player. And the Steelers answered those questions shortly after the draft by trading him to the Dallas Cowboys for a 3rd and a 6th. The Steelers were not done, though, because they went and got Jonnu Smith and Jalen Ramsey from the Miami Dolphins, who were needing to clear up cap and trying to give these guys what they wanted. And in that trade, the Steelers shockingly sent back Minkah Fitzpatrick, a guy that's been a cornerstone of the Steelers defense for over half a decade. It was shocking because, again, they were in talks throughout the offseason for Jalen Ramsey. Jalen was interested in a divorce from the Dolphins. They needed to clear up money. And Jonnu was saying he wants an extension, and the Dolphins weren't going to give that to him. So it was clear the Steelers were interested in both those players. No one really just thought that Minkah would be a part of that deal. They just thought maybe first-round pick or something like that. Maybe. And no, the Steelers were willing to give up Minkah for Jonnu and Jalen. The other move the Steelers made was sign Darius Slay. I'm not fully going into signings yet, but I also just wanted to mention that because the Steelers made a lot of moves this offseason, and that's one of those ones that could get forgotten with everything else. And then another signing was the Chargers, because another former Steeler, Najee Harris, decided to move on and go sign with the Los Angeles Chargers, where they replaced J.K. Dobbins with Najee Harris before going in the first round drafting another running back. But again, we're not talking about draft picks today. They also signed Mekhi Becton. It was clear in the playoff loss to Houston that they needed interior offensive line help, and Mekhi Becton, coming off the Super Bowl run with the Eagles, was going to provide that for him. We saw Tyreek Hill get traded. No, we didn't. We did not see Tyreek Hill get traded this offseason. Thought we were going to see it. We did not see it. Anyways, we saw a lot of players, specifically receivers, return to their former teams, original teams this offseason, starting with Mike Williams. Mike Williams signed with the Chargers, and then at the beginning of training camp, caught the Chargers very much off guard by deciding to retire. And yeah, they had to go in a different direction. So they got Keenan Allen, the other former Charger that just spent 1 year away. And yeah, now he's going to be paired up with Ladd McConkey. I'm very excited to see Keenan back in a Chargers uniform. and see what he has left to his game. Adam Thielen took a pay cut to get traded back to the Vikings, a team that he's been with his entire career outside of the last 2 seasons. And I was a little surprised that the Panthers and Thielen were moving on because Thielen's been such a, steady connection for Bryce over the last few years. But Thielen wanted to go home, and the Panthers were confident in their young receiving core, so they decided to make the move. And the Vikings right now sort of need another receiver with Addison having a suspension, Naylor having some injuries, and Justin Jefferson having some hamstring issues. Moving on, Amari Cooper, who I'm a big, big fan of, decided to go back to the team that drafted him in 2014 in the first round in the Las Vegas Raiders. The other 2014 first rounder that went back to his original team, Brandon Cooks, and another former Cowboy, decided to go back to New Orleans, where he'll try to prove that he still has some left to his game in his 30s next to Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. We saw Cooper Kupp leave the team that originally drafted him back in 2017, I believe, and it was sad to see. The Rams were sort of shopping him, trying to give him the chance to prove it on his current contract before no team really wanted to take that on, so they cut him. And they moved in a direction going to get Devontae Adams, who last year had his issues with the Jets because the Jets' offense was just so inconsistent. Rodgers tried feeding him the ball throughout the last couple weeks of the year to get that 100th touchdown together, and I very much enjoyed it for some of those weeks because I had him in fantasy. Anyways, the Patriots made some big moves. Stephon Diggs, another receiver, was on the move after tearing his ACL last year and going back to the division he was with the Bills for the best years of his career, and the Patriots just want to have a guy next to Drake May. The other thing they did as well was go get Milton Williams, a player that with Philly in their Super Bowl run that didn't necessarily start, but a lot of teams were willing to see what he could look like in a starting role. The Panthers also offered him a big deal, and I believe for a minute it was reported he was going to sign with the Panthers before it came out he was going to the Patriots. Carlton Davis, he was with the Lions last year. He was with the Bucs for the rest of his career before then. Also went to the Patriots. The Patriots made some moves this offseason with a lot of the money that they had, and I think they still have the most money in the NFL, fun fact. The Colts, outside the Daniel Jones move, of course, they made some good moves this offseason. They brought in Tre'Davious Ward to be the outside corner. They need some help on defense, and they brought in Cameron Bynum to be their strong safety. And they got Xavier Howard, who I know doesn't have much left to his game, out of retirement to be the other starter on the other side from Ward for the year. The Bears with Ben Johnson, they needed to fix up the O-line for Caleb Williams. That was simple. So what do? They traded for Joe Thuney, and that was a big surprise because Thuney was such a key piece of the Chiefs' 15-2 regular season and Super Bowl run. Yes, he struggled in the Super Bowl. The entire offensive line struggled in the Super Bowl because he played out of position for most of last year. He's in his 30s and was asked to move from left guard to left tackle, and he did a great job of that for most of the year. But you can't hold that job forever. He's going back to his original position with the Bears, and I think he's going to be great there. The Bears also got Drew Dalman, who has been really good with the Falcons for this stretch of his career. And the Bears just weren't done yet because they also traded for Jonah Jackson from the Los Angeles Rams, who last year signed with the Rams, leaving the Lions to be their starter, but he got hurt and then just fell out of the rotation. There was a proven starter immediately after that when he got hurt. And I think they were going to cut him or just move on. But the Bears capitalized because obviously that connection to Ben Johnson, Ben trusts him. And if he's not hurt, he's a guy that Ben really does trust to be a starter on his team. So Dalman, Thuney, and Jonah Jackson immediately add to this Bears O-line that looks so much better. Then the Broncos made 4 really big moves this offseason that added to the major 4 positions of need. On defense, they needed a strong safety and they needed an outside linebacker. They didn't really need it. They still had like the best defense in football last year, but they still did it by getting Dre Greenlaw and Hufanga from the 49ers to add to those positions. On offense, they needed a tight end, they needed a receiver, they kind of needed a receiver, and they needed a running back. Well, they addressed tight end and running back for sure by going out and getting J.K. Dobbins to add to their second round or third round pick in R.J. Harvey, and Evan Ingram, who, when healthy, has been one of the best tight ends in the NFL. Immediately adds to an offense that and a roster that just looks like one of the most complete rosters in all of football. Some more guys on the move. Joey Bosa, after spending his entire career with the Chargers, decided to go to the Buffalo Bills. And yeah, that's going to be weird. That's going to be weird to see. Javon Holland, with the Dolphins all this time and didn't get an extension from them for his rookie deal. And yeah, decided to go on the move. He had a really rough 2024. But if he's anywhere near where he was before 2024, he'll be a guy that the Giants like a lot. The Giants add to their secondary, a secondary that needed a lot of help. And if he's anywhere near where he was before 2024, I think he'll be just fine. And I think the Giants will be just fine. Josh Sweat, after winning a Super Bowl with the Philadelphia Eagles, decided to go to the Arizona Cardinals and pair up with his former head coach, or former defensive coordinator, Jonathan Gannon, who's now the head coach for the Arizona Cardinals. The Ravens added 2 veterans in Jair Alexander and DeAndre Hopkins. Hopkins obviously is not the player he once was, but can be a good wide receiver 3 next to Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman. He showed it with the Chiefs last year. He still has some left to him. And then Jair Alexander has had injuries over the last 3 seasons and has just struggled to be healthy. And when healthy, though, he can still be one of the best corners in football and a guy that has shown there's not many people like him in the league when healthy. DJ Reed left the Jets to go to the Lions, as every single offseason they go get another corner to beef up that outside corner spot. Last offseason was Carlton Davis. Previous season it was Cam Sutton. Let's hope this one really works out, because DJ Reed, when at his best, has been one of the best corners in football. Just a few more moves to talk about before we move to guys that got paid. Jonathan Allen, Javon Hargrave were both signed by the Vikings to really beef up their interior defensive line. They traded Harrison Phillips. Allen struggled through injuries throughout 2024 before ending the season really strong, especially in the playoffs for the Commanders. And just when the Commanders got good, and he was with them his entire career, they move off of him. Javon Hargrave got a big deal from the 49ers 2 years ago, from leaving the Eagles to go to the 49ers, and went in that Super Bowl run with them in 2023, but struggled at the beginning of 24 and then just has season-ending injury. And now both those guys get second chances with the Vikings, and they got rid of Phillips to allow these guys to be starters. 3 guys that were out of the league or rotating out of the league in 2024. 2 were rotating out of the league. The other was just retired. Devin White, Jamal Adams, and Darren Waller. Let's talk about the 2 Raiders first. White looks to be a starter this year, despite really, really struggling over the last 2 years to stay in the league and have real roles on his 2 previous teams. Tampa Bay, who originally drafted him in 2019, and Philadelphia, who signed him last offseason and then moved off of him halfway through the year. Jamal Adams struggled with the Titans, just had a major injury a few years ago and just hasn't been the same player. Both guys are getting a second chance with the Raiders. And then Darren Waller, he retired last offseason after 1 year with the Giants, and now gets to come back with the Dolphins, who needed a tight end because they traded Jonnu Smith, obviously. And finally, the last move we'll talk about, Micah Parsons, the biggest move of the offseason, the biggest move in any recent offseason, and a move that only happens once in a generation in the NFL. I haven't decided if I'm going to make a full video on the Micah Parsons situation yet, but I will say this. This situation has dominated this entire offseason. It's a once-in-a-generation type of move that we see in this league. The moves like this don't happen. We've never seen a player this good this early in his career be traded this fast. We just haven't. 1 in 29 players in the history of the NFL has been traded after making a Pro Bowl the first 4 years of his career. And that player is Micah Parsons. It's crazy. In March, we thought that the deal would get done. Micah was talking about he'd take less or would get ahead of the market so the deal could just be done. Jerry and him agreed to a deal, and then Micah's agent never saw it. If I could read the lines between any of this, it's that Jerry just felt like he was done with Micah Parsons, that Jerry's ego got in the way, but this isn't a Micah Parsons video. This is a recap video. Micah Parsons was traded to the Green Bay Packers for Kenny Clark and 2 first-round picks. Micah's currently suffering from a back injury, and Kenny Clark fills a role that Dallas needs in the nose tackle spot. We'll see what the Cowboys defense looks like this year with a 30-year-old Kenny Clark, and we'll see what the Packers defense looks like this year with a 26-year-old Micah Parsons, who does have a back injury, but has been a Pro Bowler for every year of his career and an All-Pro for 3 out of the first 4 years of his career. But yeah, big offseason. Now moving on to guys that got paid. Let's just start with Micah Parsons, who just got the most money any non-quarterback has ever gotten in the history of the NFL, of 47 annual average salary. 47 million annual average salary is insane for a non-quarterback, but it makes sense. You're getting ahead of the market by years, and that's what the Packers wanted to offer. The offseason really got kick-started by Max Crosby with the extensions. Crosby was the first one. I think Myles Garrett was the second one. Then TJ Watt. They kept breaking each other's extension records time after time after time. Danielle Hunter got an extension by the Texans to just get ahead of that. He was on the 1+1 deal or something like that, where he could have been a free agent next offseason. And the Texans decided they wanted to keep him around for just a little bit longer at least. And Trey Hendrickson, I mean, he was another guy that was talked about a lot this offseason because the Bengals defense was so bad last year, and he led the league in sacks. He was one of the best edge rushers in football last year. And the issue was the Bengals weren't going to offer him an extension. He wanted to trade, and he'd be a free agent next offseason. Well, it ended with him not getting as much money as other edge rushers. He'll still be a free agent next offseason. And in my opinion, I think he sort of got screwed by the Bengals here. Still, Terry McLaurin was another holdout this offseason, a guy that requested a trade as well, that didn't end up getting his money, ended up getting a good contract, especially for a guy that's 29 years old, hasn't had the top years that the recent guys have had, like a Devontae Adams getting extended this late in his career from the Raiders a few years ago. But still a guy that has been a really, really good receiver, and I'd say a top 20 to 30 receiver in the NFL over the last 3 to 4 years. And that might be, someone might get offended by that. I totally mean all the respect in the world to Terry. He deserves his money. Rashawn Slater broke the tackle record and then ended up getting hurt, but he did break the tackle contract record. Zach Bond got paid by the Eagles. Saquon Barkley got paid by the Eagles. Two guys that were signed last offseason that needed extensions. Or I don't know about Saquon really needing one, but they went ahead and just, gave him the money because, well, he won them a Super Bowl. George Karlaftis got an extension from the Chiefs. A lot of 2022 guys did. Sauce Gardner, Garrett Wilson, Deron Bland, Kyle Hamilton. We saw Trey McBride get extended. We saw Josh Allen get another extension, which is weird because last offseason there was so much talk of Josh Allen's contract really limiting what the Bills could do with the roster. But now he gets another extension that keeps him with the roster through 2030. T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, another really, really big contract situation that no one knew what was going to happen. T, every other offseason over the last two offseasons, not every other offseason, you know what I mean? Felt like a trade guy, like he was going to get traded. But no, now 40% of the Bengals cap space goes to Joe, Jamar, and T. Matthew Stafford was almost a Giant for a minute before taking a 1-year extension deal that compensates him for 2025. It's kind of weird. He wanted a pay raise for 2025. Rams weren't sure if they were going to give him that. Him and the Rams kept discussing. He ends up getting their pay raise. And if he's on the roster going into next year, I think he gets another $47 million. Cortland Sutton got an extension and was secured in the short term, I believe. He is an older receiver, to be fair. Derek Stingley, another 2022 guy that got extended. And then some of the other trade guys outside of Micah that got extended. Geno Smith, already mentioned DK Metcalf, and Joe Thuney, the guy I mentioned earlier that got sent to the Bears, was given a nice little extension from the Bears. The last 3 extensions I'll talk about, Brock Purdy, just 3 years after being Mr. Relevant, the last pick in the 2022 NFL Draft, he gets a 5-year, $265 million extension and $181 million guaranteed. Not bad for the last pick in the draft just 3 years ago. And then Zach Allen, one of the most unappreciated guys in the league, a star and a huge part of the number 1 defense in the NFL in the Denver Broncos. He gets an extension, and deservedly so, man. I can't talk up Zach Allen enough. He was extremely unappreciated in Arizona and has been unappreciated in Denver. If you love defensive tackle play, go watch Zach Allen. And the final extension I'll talk about, J.C. Horn. This really kicked off the cornerback market with Derek Stingley and Ahmad Sauce Gardner. He got a nice extension from the Panthers and has been one of the more underrated guys in the league. And yeah, he's had some injuries here and there, but again, one of the more underrated guys in the league. So much happened in this very, very long offseason. It's been a long 7 months, but we're back. We have football every Sunday until 2026. We get football Thursdays, Sundays, and Mondays up until 2026. It is going to be a very fun season with a lot of just new things to see, a lot of fresh faces to see on new teams. I'm excited, and I hope all of you are just as excited as I am and look forward to these next, 5 months? Either way, this is Son of a Sports. I'll catch y'all next time.